relationship because contractually now they get like 50% of the house regardless of how divorces go. Secondly, the fact that people are able to end relationships that are harmful is a good thing, and a thing that I will literally stand on a hill and die for, insofar as we tell you that it's probably good that people aren't coerced to continually stay in a relationship by societal pressures, and the fact they lack access to capital that means they no longer are able to leave a relationship quickly and easily and without blame. That means you're more likely to fall into more toxic relationships. Note mechanistically, the reason why Western states adopted the no-fault divorce is insofar as like women had to like literally approve their husband was abusing them, meant that their husband was more likely to abuse them insofar as they had no legal mechanism to leave unless their husband would either let them or they could prove that like wrongdoing was being done towards them. That means things like subtle abuse and financial abuse became normalized in like states like the US and the UK. And like note that this no-fault divorce is something that we on OG think is good alongside the prenup. Look, a few pieces of responses, but let me deal with like prenups and why we mechanistically think these probably like create less of a power imbalance with the courts, because this is like an important framing you don't get from OO. No, there is a comparative difference in power dynamics and intent when you have a divorce and when you have a prenup. Note like things like the financial split of what you do with your income. Do you like split your accounts? Do you sell the house or keep the house? And B, what you do with children, i.e. do we like have shared custody? Am I like legally obligated to stay in the same nation state if I want to have 50-50 access to my kids? It's something that we agree on prenup as opposed to in divorce. Note the power dynamics flip comparatively way more when I have like an obligation towards my spouse that I love and care for and like want to show that I have a good relationship. And in fact, I'm probably likely to concede on a lot of grounds to have neutrality because I think that like I love them and I want to show them this is an element of love as opposed to fucking them over with rich lawyers, in a comparatively different way to a divorce where I think, fuck this person, they're trying to take my children. When I think Hamza's trying to take my kids, I'm way more likely to like use overpowered lawyers, particularly prominent when like a man is like wealthier in a relationship and has access to that wealth because of societal obligations, meaning that like women are homemakers and have less access to disposable income. I mean, they're less likely to afford these like high-powered lawyers. I mean, I'm likely to be able to exploit them in the courts through this excess wealth that means I can have more better lawyers, more research that means I'm able to beat them in court. On the comparative flip, when it's like legally mandated that we have 50-50 access, this court proceeding's much less messy. I have access to this divorce, and like I'm less likely to do things out of spite and misintent burden of which like people lose all trust because a prenup exists. Note that like these like people recognize in status quo relationships are going to end. Insofar as like half of relationships end in most Western states, we think relationships ending after marriage is probably possibly even a good thing if it's because it's more accessible. No, marriage necessarily in status quo isn't like this huge like tie to be permanently bonded to me and Hamza forever. It's more likely a number of financial and legal ties. Note we think these ties are like potentially very harmful because they usually make you one unit and therefore empower one person within the relationship, usually the male, usually like the most like highest earning person in that relationship, and they get certain like legal protections and standards we think are like even harmful to ending relationship. Note the prenup like mitigates this. Secondly, on this like coercive push to relieve the relationship, here's the comparative flip, because note when we explained to you that like insofar as I lack disposable income because I was told to be the homemaker and raise kids, when a divorce happens because my husband's now being financially coercive, I lack the disposable income to actually fight for access to my children. Insofar as I probably have a care towards my children, both directly by being their parent, but also like intrinsically because they are children. I have produced them. I also feel like some form of like worthy obligation for them because they lack the recourse to do things. No, a 4-year-old can't really vote or get a job. That means like I probably stay in this harmful relationship in their interest and I'm more vulnerable to these abuses. Look, we tell you those people specifically lack power in court, both like particularly women because they lack access to high-powered lawyers, because like societal obligations, the 6-year-old just gets bought by like the parent, probably the richer parent. Again, we think this power imbalance is probably harmful when wealth is probably able to like overpower who like gets access to the kids or the house. Look, more over on this and like this, yeah.
You cut out for me half a minute ago, like my entire Zoom crashed. So it was at 4 and 30 seconds. Battle about the children from the women after the divorces. It was at 4 and 30 seconds.
Yep. Yeah, like, look, Children also probably don't get listened to. We recognize that like they're young people, they probably lack like recourse and also lack various concepts like object permanence or logic and long-term thinking. That means they're probably likely to be bored. Secondly, on that, we think like comparatively, these courts are probably quite male biased. Like most judges are men in like Western states. You have capital to like raise those kids and have the same standard of relationship. If like a person who's been a homemaker doesn't have the same wealth as a CEO, you're probably less likely to get access to the kids. Note why the prenup probably exists in like status quo and opside. That's why it's exploited.
Not have lawyers that exists for prenup, so you're still
look like I've already given you the mechanisms for this panel. When I actually love a person and care for them, I'm probably less likely to actively try and fuck them in a prenup because I just don't engage in the marriage if I think my spouse is that vindictive that they're going to shaft me on the percentage of house we share. I probably actually have like a loving obligation towards them insofar my incentives are to make this marriage work. This doesn't happen on the divorce because like my incentives are to actively make them lose because it comes a zero-sum game. Who gets more of the house, who gets more of the kids. That doesn't happen insofar as I believe the marriage will work and we therefore share access to these people and the prenup acts as like a protection for this to fail. Note that this is like a relationship that mean we think these prenups are important because no, mechanisms for why like marriages change. Firstly, like people hide the way they behave before marriage. Note you're just like trying to get some form of like approval from this person. You probably like feel levels of attraction to them. Answers are based on whether you think that they are the answers that will get you into a relationship or the answers you want. Working relationship. We tell you that's harmful, and note when like this prenup exists, you probably have like various clauses to get out of these relationships. And insofar as we think people lie in these relationships, mechanistically, I think it's probably good to have ways to help them get out of the relationship when the relationship isn't on the terms that they agree. Note that we don't think this is necessarily a harmful thing or something that like reduces consent, because the difference is we think that like it's probably more likely you have ways to get out of the person who matched my incentives, let's end this thing amicably, as opposed to being tied into a relationship where you feel coerced to have kids, or you feel coerced to do certain things that we think don't necessarily line up with your incentives because people change after this marriage. Not on the way up, we tell you it's probably much more likely you get more consensual and safer relationships when you have the like get out clause of ending
And to continue and open the second half of the debate, very proud to call upon the member of government.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hi, I'll take one from CEO since all took only one POI from us. I think it's perfectly legit. Okay, POIs in the chat will take you around 5 minutes. Okay, starting in 3, 2, 1. I think the biggest problem with opening government is that they just spam a lot of words and these words don't necessarily mean anything. But the serious real problem with open government, that's just a hate to the current meta, is that they point to a lot of problems, like, for example, women being weak in a weakened position of power, like social pressures, but they are debating in this particular case, and we're going to talk about the real things. Basically, 2 things. Number one, that this will force people to have very important conversations before marriage, and even if they break up and decide to not get married, this is a good thing. I know OG said the second part, but they don't explain why you get forced into conversation. And secondly, why this leads to better divorces on our side of the house. Very simple analysis. So let's get into the first point. Why? What are these important conversations? These are important conversations about money, life choices, what you're going to do while raising the kids, who will take care of how much of the kids, who will take the kids after you divorce, etc. No, we don't want to have these conversations without the rise of these norms. Why? 3 structural reasons. Firstly, when you engage in this communication, there is a specific stigma, but not stigma that opening government point, which is religion, but stigma around the lines of, so you're doubting our love in this particular case. You do not love me in this sort of case, right? If you want to engage in these conversations, then you're already thinking of us getting divorced, right? Does that mean you have some kind of problem with me? Is our sexual life bad? Are you don't you like my cooking? And this type of thing, like this is the way people think about this sort of thing, because the natural reaction is for you to doubt whether or not. But second reason here is that marriage is portrayed to us as being the best thing ever, right? Because think about how you've been indoctrinated. From little kids, you watched movies as to everyone being happy around marriage, about this big, huge event in your life, and one of the most important events in your life in this particular case, about it being spontaneous, right? The norm that the guy has to take the girl out and like propose to her over dinner at a special place and not tell her in this particular ring. Or it's generally associated with nice things, like for example, flowers, dressing. So you have a natural push to not think of negative things in these sort of things. To not think of, for example, you getting divorced. To not talk about who splits the money and does these particular things. To not talk about this. But thirdly, just game theory, right? In order for you to engage in this conversation, both people need to engage in this conversation, right? So if just one party pulls away and just says, I don't think we have a problem, it's very easy for you to not engage into this particular case. Why does the prenup solve this? Firstly, the rise in demand and the normalization means that more people necessarily engage in prenup. The prenup itself pushes you to have these conversations, right? Pushes you for you to talk about these particular things, even if you don't want to. Not all conceive this by their own analysis. But secondly, it takes the focus out of the other things, right? Because when you're focused on, the flowers and these type of things, the norm creates the space for you to engage in these conversations, creates the time for you to engage, and tells you that it would be normal for you to have engagement in these conversations before you do this. But thirdly, and this is the clear nuance here, people are scared of engaging in the first step in this type of things, right? Usually when they first engage, then each additional conversation about the prenup is pretty easy. But making this first step is hard. Thus, the norm pushing you to do this is important. Why is this impactful? Firstly, you're able to see red flags. Like if the person is greedy and opening opposition said, if the person doesn't want to agree with you in these particular things, you can see certain things that the person will normally not be able to see, because normally you'll never see them in this particular situation. But secondly, it is absolutely okay if you're incompatible and you should break up, right? If this gives you a reason, if you cannot come to agree that this happens, then we'll split the kids like this, then that's perfectly fine. That means you miss divorce. That means you can find another partner, maybe better for you. That means that you're not wasting your time. All of this stuff is super nice and super good to people, and we think that we shouldn't engage in this sort of thing. But I'll prove to you secondly why you get better divorces on our side of the house. So group that will divorce symmetrically, but it's better. The key premise here that opening government doesn't analyze is why the normalization leads to better conversations. This is the key analysis that needs to be given here. 3 reasons. Firstly, when other people talk about this, they normalize this phenomenon in your head. It deletes the stigma. They, for example, explain the benefits of this being done right. So, for example, Ted engaging in prenup, all this is good because we did this, and the harms of not doing it right. So let's say Elizabeth didn't do her prenup properly, didn't engage in this particular case. So people are able to have these meaningful conversations. But second, it also creates support networks, Reddit threads, Facebook groups, where people share their different experiences and engage. When there's more of them, they're able to gain the critical mass to do this, to do this sort of thing. But third, it just creates norms around it, right? When, like, how do you say? Because it aggregates the mutual experiences of people. Go to the expert before you do this particular thing. Think about it concretely. Think about it best in this particular case. So this is the natural way the conversation is like to be good. But secondly is, what do people do when they're uncertain? They go to the expert, right? When many people want to engage in this sort of thing, experts will most likely speak out. One, it creates a market for people, because when you have an increase of supply, more people wanting to engage in prenup, that means that you get not supply, demand. You get an increase of supply, more experts popping out, more people getting educated on top, more people speaking out, creating informative videos, going on talk shows, talking about why this is something good. Before I get into third reason, CEO, do you have POI?
Yeah, a lot of the rights that you put in prenups are future-based, and even if you get to the stage of marriage, the red flags are unlikely to have occurred or marginal.
No, they're not marginal. When you're talking about who gets the kids, that's pretty big red flag. But secondly, future-based. This is the thing. When you talk about with other people and when you're with the expert, you are pushed to talk about the future. And this is all response. You can't EPL them on this particular case. I have no idea why won't you take other considerations in this particular case. And both prenup conversations are usually long-term, right? Or at least the normal aggregate for you to take this sort of thing. So you need to take the time to do these important conversations and you to engage. So you have a lot of time to discuss. What is the impact of this? This means, bottom line is, you have good prenups. Why is this important? A couple of reasons. Because divorce is horrible. Firstly, I disagree with all. Lawyers have horrible incentives system. They actually want to market themselves as people who are able to get most money from the other side in this particular case. So they have pernicious incentive to make the divorce as worse as possible and to protract it as long as possible in order to continue getting their payments in this particular moment, in this particular case. But secondly, notice when there is uncertainty and doubt on these type of things that we're talking about, who gets the kids, who gets the money, you are structurally likely to be opposed to the other side, because you no longer have the good things that tie you to this person. He's no longer your husband or your wife. This means that you are pushed to be aggressive towards it. What do? You engage, you engage with the child. You start manipulating and picking fights against it. You create an overall toxic environment that on comparative will not happen or is less likely to happen when these things are made and when these things are decided. So all the negative experiences of this type of thing go to our side of the house. For all these reasons, propose.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to continue, very proud to call upon the member of opposition.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I prefer audible POIs, please. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. CEO will win this debate because we'll engage with the PM's challenge of explaining why normalization of prenups is especially bad, not just prenups in general. I'm going to talk about agency, but firstly more on that point, things that are prior to the opening opposition case. So I think the normalization is bad for two reasons. Firstly, there's going to be a broader uptake. This is something that opening relies on, but doesn't probably prove, and I will. But secondly, I think that particularly that means that lots of people who wouldn't otherwise get prenups are going to get them. And those are the cases where it's going to be particularly negative. So firstly, on uptake, as in, why is there going to now be a pressure to get prenups in general? Something that OO says, but their analysis is very thin on, right? Even if you don't normally want them, right? Note that when the people who tend to give you pressure in your life to follow certain norms, like your family members, your seniors, media, etc., tends to push risk-averse norms towards you, right? Your family member, your mother, tells you not to smoke because she doesn't want you to get cancer. She tells you to get insurance because she doesn't want you to have financial problems. She tells you to save because she wants you to be able to retire, right? People, loved ones around you, especially authority figures, tend to be scared of tragedies and disasters and negative things in your lives and want you to do risk-averse behaviors, even if they have some cost like insurance does, to avoid those negative situations, right? That applies to something like divorce, right? Where if according to normal norms, it would be likely that family members would have an incentive to want you to avoid the worst case scenario of something like a divorce, which they perceive to be the case with not having a prenup because you haven't prepared for it. They want you to do something which is, even if not successful, a cursory effort for preventing it being as out of control, as uncertain in their mind as possible. They want some reassurance. The reason that we don't have a norm for prenups in the moment is the stigma that Rumen so well characterized about things like marriage being this sacred tradition in our society, that we don't want to sacrilege with the idea that divorce is a possibility. When you remove that, which is necessary from normalizing the prenups, that's when you end up with the uptake pressure, which OO asserts but doesn't prove, right? This is really important to the debate for two reasons, right? Firstly, I think if prenups are bad, then improving a scaling, or if they're good, okay, so this actually helps open gov teams as well, then proving a scaling of them is important intuitively, right? More or less of a good thing or bad thing happening is morally important. But secondly, I think it's about who's getting them who wouldn't otherwise, right? I don't think we have to win or not by saying that prenups are all bad. I think the point is that people who wouldn't normally get them, now getting them out of a status quo that encourages it, is negative, right? That's because I think we could take be charitable to some of the gov material in terms of the idea that some people maybe are capable of having good discussions before them getting married and are good at thinking about the long term and are able to make better decisions. But I think those are the people in the status quo who are likely to get prenups anyway, right? Know that there's the stigma around them is not that bad in situations where people are usually able to actually get them, right? I think that there is some amount of negativity, but probably if you're someone who's like strong-willed enough to have really complex emotional discussions like Ruben wants, you're also probably strong-willed enough to tell your mum, oh yeah, I know you don't want me to get a prenup, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? I think that therefore this really mitigates a lot of the gov material. Loads of the people who are going to be good at having prenups are the people who are incentivized to have them, because as I said, those are people who probably have the emotional strength necessary, but they're also the people who are going to take the necessary steps in order to do them well. What do you get on the alternative on the gov side, where prenups become a normal thing like filling out your insurance forms? Notice two things on emotion and CG's case. Lots of people are really bad at having difficult conversations. The fact that you're now supposed to talk about child rearing doesn't mean that you now talk about it in an effective way, right? You're probably going to have a discussion where you're supposedly airing out your problems, but you're often doing it in a very sheltered, cautious, eggshell, overly romanticized and overly sanitized way, right? A lot of those discussions, if your relationship isn't up to that strength, aren't going to be good. It's rather you're probably going to get a false sense of security that supposedly you've now solved these problems when you actually haven't. That makes it worse, if not symmetric, the problems in a relationship, because as I said, you now feel like you should have been able to be solved for this. There's a norm that this is supposed to sort that out, but when you get into the reality of the relationship, you realize that everything is much harder than you think. Or you feel actively guilty because both of you probably feel like you're somewhat deceiving each other when you're walking on eggshells because the discussion was hard in the first place, right? But secondly, it means people just don't put in the necessary effort. A lot of gov is talking about putting in effort to make an arrangement that's really important. Intuition pump about things like insurance. How many people sign up to some insurance thing without fucking reading it because it's a legal thing that they're supposed to do as a norm, but it's really tedious and boring. They don't want to do it, and it's something that they don't understand very well. Those are all things that are likely to happen when people are getting prenups out of a social norm rather than because they actively choose it. They're not going to be putting in the requisite effort in order to make the prenup good, which probably means that because of the complexity of laws, you're making concessions to things or implying things you didn't intend to in the first place, right? If you end up in a divorce situation, you're going to realize that you gave away things that you never even consciously thought you were giving away in the first place. I think this is stronger than OO material. I'll take CG.
But when you are in an environment with experts, with everyone around you telling you that you should ask these questions, you are pushed to talk about it, even if you don't like it. It's usually the first step that is hard.
Okay, two things. Firstly, I think that the discussion doesn't necessarily mean it's well suited to your relationship. So the expert could advise you, but you would need to have a good back and forth, for example, where both of you are, because they need to have the legal expertise, but you need to be putting in the effort to explain your preferences, and you need to be working out and making sure that those things are synthesizing together properly, which is really complicated. If one party isn't doing that, then a lawyer probably just like gives you the boilerplate deal, which doesn't work for your specific relationship, or also probably often does the minimal effort required so that they can, get as much money out of you for as little work, which is what they have the financial incentive to do, so they can take on more cases, right? They're not necessarily going to put lots of effort if you're not a client who's wanting that out of them. You're going to want, and a lot of people are probably going to want the like bargain basement prenup deal just so that they can appease their parent who wants them to get one, right? They're not going to pay loads and loads of money for a good lawyer, right? I think this substantially scales the impact that OO tries to backload into the DLO speech about things like future regret, right? Know that when you get into a divorce situation, you're in a situation where you feel uniquely like you've lost control of your life and you're trying to capture it again. You want to change your not only your circumstances might change, which DLO mentions, but often your personality has shifted over time, or your preferences, or the nature of your relationship, right? In that situation, you want to be able to get up in a court and stand up for your current preferences and be doing it at a point where you're actually passionate about what the implications of divorce. Most people, when they're getting a prenup, probably because of over idealism or because actually it's just statistically likely, think that they're not going to get divorced, right? They don't take it seriously enough. That means that if you end up in a divorce situation, you're going to have all this regret, all this shame about the things that you didn't take seriously enough. And you're going to feel shit that rather than being able to now stand up for yourself in the situation where you're actually having to face the implications of it, you're being tied to your past self who didn't take this thing seriously enough. I think in terms of things like economic wealth imbalances, those are largely symmetric. I think the most important tipping point in this debate is whether people actually have a good control over situations like divorce, which only happens on the op side. I urge you to oppose.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to sum up government side, very proud to call government week.
Hi, I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. 3, 2. So I spent a lot of years interning in law firms that kind of focused on family law. And in my experience, what you need to realize is that there are very individualistic cases for both sides of the house. There are rich women and rich men, poor women and poor men. There are people who are very bad in these situations, people who are better in situations. There are some cases in which there is a good groundwork for understanding on both sides, and in other cases there won't. And I think what I'm trying to explain here is that when opening government talks about a lot of the fringe cases, it is fair for opening opposition to push and say, oh, but these cases do not apply in most of the situations. So why would we welcome this normalization if it doesn't help most people? I think this is when we extend a lot in terms of the mechanism that government gives you, apply and are crucial for all of these situations, even if you don't end up being on that part of a process in the first place, and you're not like literally hating your partner. Now, I wanna kind of engage with a couple of things in closing opposition. I think firstly, a lot of the responses that we get against us are at best mitigation, right? They basically say, oh, some people are gonna do prenups either way, or other people are in the best way possible, but at least structurally they're more likely to have some actually eventually getting married in the first place. Blah, blah. I think first of all, like this disregards all of the situations where you're not that young when you actually are getting married. I think that today, especially because of numerous norms such as hookup culture, such as people wanting to have a better career, capitalism pushes them to make these choices. I think like just people seeing that like a lot of people have divorced in the last 20 years, 50% of marriages end up in divorce and things like that. Statistics basically show them and make most people not get married at like 20 years old. Of course, there's some of these cases, but there are many more that there are. So it's not fair to just use a characterization of one group of people in the society to kind of rebut this concept. I think there's a lot of people who structurally, because they want, when they get married, to have a lot of things covered for them, and they have these incentives to have a career, to have a stable identity and things like that, are far more likely to understand what they want when they are making these particular choices. But I think that it also doesn't engage with the other characterization. As far as you are entered into like this particular concept and you didn't have a prenup, I would question that it's really unclear to what extent you're gonna understand your preferences more. I think like things such as like generally wanting to make sure that you have like stable parental rights over your kids, or like that you are somewhat financial rights to be covered. So I'm not sure to what extent the changes that you go through during your marriage are changing you so much that you're unable to understand, hey, I want some safety. Their own characterizations they're protected to a certain level, and if they are not thinking about these things, their parents are pushing them to, or the normalization factor of these things are pushing them to think about the future, which is good on our side of the house. But I want to also engage a little bit more on the process of this, and also kind of directly respond to opening opposition, because they say, oh, like you can set boundaries on both sides of the house. Here, Rumen's mechanism on like the process itself is really crucial, because like as CEO says, like this is a moment in your life where your whole life crumbles, like you lose control of your life. I really like the way that they worded it, and I think it's true. And it brings a lot of anger, disappointment, sadness, feelings of betrayal, and things like that. You're very irrational in these particular moments when
You pressure individuals to opt out of healthy relationships by making them think the challenges people normally face are red flags. At least on our side, we can protect abusive relationships by calling them for emotionally gaslighting or hitting their partners. You don't actually protect people in healthy relationships in your side.
No, but I think people in healthy relationships, if they're that healthy, are good. But what I'm trying to tell you, if regardless if you're in a more healthy relationships or like one of the worst ones, this moment of weakness is likely to occur. And this is where you're likely to make irrational decisions. And there are actors which have a lot of power in that process, the lawyers themselves, to push you to make decisions that are not automatic. So I'm unsure, even if you have the ability to access your preference a little bit more, why this will inevitably mean better for the end of the relationships, I think both.
Okay, we thank the speaker for that speech, and to sum up the entire debate, very proud to call the opposition whip.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's respond to closing government's pushes about you being young and you not knowing what you want. The unique thing from Alice's speech, which was not responded to, check your flow panel, is the idea of pressures from family, people in proximity, and experts around you, which infiltrate the process because you are young and tell you what you should believe. This is a different pressure to the pressure that opening opposition are talking about. I don't think government whip actually responded to these claims. I'm going to explain why this is really important in not being able to formulate ideas. Alistair says, therefore, like Alistair says, you have to rely upon people around you to make decisions in these conversations because of what they want for you. This is important because, one, it manipulates your true preferences, right? So the preferences that you may have about this may be changed because of power asymmetry, because you believe your mum, you believe your dad, you believe people like experts in what they're telling you, but what they say may not fit the relationship you have because all relationships are unique. Therefore, the ability to formulate your ideas like the extension says in the closing government is unlikely to happen because these are ideas which are tampered with by other people. So I think that you're more likely to rely upon people there as well. So I don't think you're able to formulate ideas to begin with. There's a second pressure. Your family has an incentive. Both families want to pressure them to get a favourable deal for them because they're the ones that are trying to make sure their child gets out of it in a good way. This is what's different from opening opposition, because opening opposition talk about why you're young. But to be honest, you could be young but very, very in a good relationship where you know you want children. Therefore, and it's more proximate to the types of things that we're talking about. The second piece of way is that we are prior to opening opposition on priority weighing. One, because the uptake means that the future stuff in open opposition manifests, and the increase in uptake in the pressure from family means that this stuff that open opposition talk about happen, and they require that analysis for their case to work. You are still human beings. Therefore, you could be psychologically on edge about how the conversation may go, and you may still get defensive, right? Because people are biologically self-interested because of the pack mentality, sorry, not pack mentality, just fight or flight mechanisms, which means you still may have conversations which are still adversarial. People who can afford lawyers on both sides of the house, but Alistair is talking about the people who would not ordinarily get them. They cannot afford the best experts on their side of the house. But even if the information is free, they cannot give you specific advice. All relationships are unique. You can't take one piece of advice and put it onto another relationship because all of your scenarios are likely to be different. Therefore, if you try to copy and paste something, it may not work in the bad repercussions as well, but also algorithms on social media. You may get shown the things that you want to see rather than the diverse things that Ruben is talking about, because you may not get multiple experiences like Ruben wants. There are no red flags. A lot of red flags are important, but they are seen early on. You can know you're more likely to be emotionally charged and sensitive because you don't know what's going to happen. You are afraid people to what you want to happen, but also because of the unknown. The family stuff that Alice was talking about means that it gets even worse. I think we've dealt with closing government. Before responding to opening government, I'll take their POI.
Opening government explains why normalization will lead to less asymmetric information due to demand, more family planning due to skepticism, less stigma due to more people having it.
Okay, thank you. If you want to weigh against closing government, that's great, but you're not actually responding to any part of our case. Let's move on to dealing with opening government. They're very uncomparative for several reasons. One, I think PM's own stigma framing about religion means that there are other societal narratives which trap you in marriage and women are likely to be coerced. But also it's hard to prenup family planning and children in the first place. You don't know how many children you're going to have. You don't know if you're going to have children in the first place. So the family planning stuff is marginal at best. On financial stability, it's unclear if this is not already symmetric because of the asymmetric relations you talk about. So if you are good-willed, like opening government says, you have financial stability on both sides of the house. But if you're not, it's going to be asymmetric either way. But also, I think if all of the normalization that DPM says about relationships likely to end, why will they be goodwill in the prenup anyway? On abusive relationships, if it's so bad and so abusive, they won't get prenups in the first place because abusers want to maintain coercive control. So they don't win any of the abuse clash from opening government anyway. They don't follow societal norms and abusers are irrational, therefore they're unlikely to follow those to begin with. But also, if women get less lawyers and they have more male bias in divorce courts, this is going to be symmetric in prenups. Lawyers in prenuptial agreements will harm women there as well. The response is, but you have a loving obligation. That's what the DPM says. Prenups require individuals to think of a divorce situation. Therefore, they're biologically and psychologically wired to be selfish and risk averse. And all the family pressure that Alice talks about means that the loving obligation will be outweighed and you want to think about yourself even if you love them. The reasons that we outweigh opening opposition are very clear. We talk about prior stuff, like in the way I talked about, but also opening opposition is marginal. Because I think that one, selfish people, I think the motion assumes a level of normalization, which means the selfish people that open opposition talk about are likely to exist. But also, relationship survival is marginal because the psychological barrier to leaving a relationship when in marriage is much higher because of tied down obligations. So this is not an important point. For all those reasons, I think we have the most proximate impact of prenup agreements, and we clearly win this debate.
Okay, I thank the speaker for that speech and I thank everyone for this debate. I will take a few minutes to go over my notes. I hope it will be less than 15, but I guess at least like 5 or 7 minutes. And then I will call you back to give the rationale.
Thank you all.